What is up, y'all? Welcome back to LUMA Coding Web Design 101. Today we are going to be continuing with Lesson 2, where we are going to start learning about CSS, styling up your website, and more advanced HTML. Let's get right to the content. Firstly, we're going to go over some advanced HTML, quotations, and citations. These are really important if you want to cite details from other websites in your About Me. So, the first one is block quote. Block quote, all it does is indents, and when you hover over it, the website in this site attribute will pop up. And then this quote, this Q tag, what it does, it simply surrounds whatever text inside of it in quotes. So this can be really helpful in CSS when we want to style the quotes like one color and maybe keep the non-quotes like another color. And then next is abbreviations. Abbreviations, for example, you see this WHO, right? When you hover over them, they'll have a dotted underline under them. When you hover over them, it'll show you what is in this title attribute. So this World Health Organization. Now, address and cite are more niche, but simply these are used to italicize. So the main difference between them is, as you can see here with address, right? We have line breaks, whereas in the cite, it just goes right into a paragraph. But either way, it just italicizes stuff and can be really useful for citing addresses or just citing like art pieces, websites, things like that. So the next thing that we're going to talk about are comments. So comments are important because they can, when you write them in your code, they help another person who doesn't know coding perhaps, or just a different author, know what every code segment, or at least a large chunk of the code segments, actually do. Because anyone who doesn't know HTML will just look at your code. They're just like, oh, it's just a bunch of voodoo stuff. They don't get what is going on. But if you put comments, what it'll do is that it will create some readability to your code. And then with multi-line comments, as you can see here, they are used to comment out code. So if you want to note down code that you used previously, but now you don't want to use anymore, or you just want it to not show on your website, what this will do is all the info will still be there, but this won't show up on your website. Comments never show up on the website. They are not visible to your users. They are only visible to the authors. So now let's modify our program to use 5 of the quotations along with the comments. All right, moving on. So next, we're going to talk about today's agenda. So the first thing is we are going to be learning what exactly CSS is and how it works with HTML. Essentially, CSS is like a blanket over the bare bones HTML, which helps us style up our HTML pages and make them look a heck of a ton prettier. So with this, we are going to add colors, fonts, and layout to our About Me page and understand the box model using margins, borders, paddings, and how to space out our elements, and overall just make the page look awesome. So moving on, the first thing that we're going to cover, what exactly is CSS? I already gave the thing, right? So basically you're putting a blanket on top of the bare bones HTML, right? The important thing to think about CSS is this is more of a design type thing. So if you're good at design, you want to consider what your favorite types of color combos or how you want your website to look. Those who are good at design are typically the best at CSS. So now going on, there are 3 ways to mainly use CSS. The first one is inline. So this is simply like earlier. We'll reference earlier, right? But as you can see here, this is what we call an attribute, right? So we see block quote, cite is the attribute, equals to, in quotations, whatever is inside the quotations, we call that a value. So similarly, inline style, you could just put a style attribute, and just to do multiple attributes, you just space it out. So for example, if I wanted to put style as block quote inline, I could put a space after this end quote and then say style equals to, and then put CSS inside the quotes. That is inline CSS. The next type is internal. So this is if we put CSS code inside of a style tag that we put directly in the HTML file. So this is typically used for small projects or separate pages. If you want multiple different pages to have different styles, typically this is how you do it. But for the purpose of this class, we are going to be using the last method, which is external. So this is going to be using our lovely style.css file. And this is mainly used for big projects and websites, the type that we are going to be developing in this class. So let's get on to the content. First, let's cover the style.css file and how you can get these changes to actually update into your HTML and make it look good. So the style.css file appears under the public folder, right? The same place as your index.html. But remember, it is a separate file, but in order to import it into your index.html, you will have to memorize this set of code. Link rel equals to, and these, like before, are attributes. You see, rel and href are attributes. And typically when you see href or src as an attribute, you are typically going to put a link, right? If you just remember that, right? For the rel attribute, you put style sheet as the value, and for the href or the h-reference, you put the link, which in this case, we are using the shorthand /style.css link. If you just import this link, and link is how you import CSS files, right? This will allow you to update your changes into the HTML file, right? And it will basically tell the HTML file, hey, this is the style.css file, and we want to basically log all these changes onto the website and update them with the colors, fonts, and all the rules that we have in the style.css file. So now that we've talked about rules, first let's talk about colors, right? Because colors is probably the lifeblood of CSS. Of course, any website, if there's no colors, just black and white, it's boring, right? So the way that colors work, at least for the purpose of right now, we are just going to be using color names. So like tomato, orange, dodger blue, medium sea green, gray, slate blue, violet, light gray, right? These are some more niche names, but the more common ones are like red, black, blue, green, and so on, right? But as you can see here, we also have the more advanced hexadecimal, right? Which of course we have notes on how it works here, but I will be covering a shorthand hex later, which is much easier to use for our purposes. So now moving on, let's talk about CSS syntax. So a CSS file is made up of several rules that are all separated amongst different lines, right? And a CSS rule consists of a selector and a declaration block. So the selector is what you see right here. In this case, P is the selector. And on the next slide, we will be going over the different types of selectors. But for right now, what this selector does is it tells you what HTML elements you want to style with the declarations. And the way that declarations work is you first have the property like font size or color, colon, you have the value, so like red or 50 pixels, semicolon. Remember, for CSS, you need to have semicolons at the end of every declaration because otherwise the CSS file does not know how to separate between declarations, and for example, font size will be treated as part of the earlier value, right? This is not necessary for JavaScript as of the latest update, but for CSS, it is still necessary to split your attributes using the semicolon. So as you can see here, right, the declarations are surrounded in curly braces, and then the selector is on the outside. So let's take a look at a couple of examples of selectors. So the first one that we already kind of previewed with the singular P is the element selector. So the element selector styles all the elements of that tag, right? So for example, the paragraph tag, you see this P. If we put just a straight P, nothing before it, nothing after it, all the P tags will now be colored red, right? Because this is our declaration. We say apply this style to all P tags. So now all P tags will be colored red. So as you can see here in the how it looks section, you can see it's been turned red. And as you can see here, we're just using red, blue, and like no fancy hex code stuff for now, but we will cover over how to do shorthand hex later. So the next type is ID selector. So this is using an ID attribute. In fact, we'll just go over both ID and class. So this is using the ID and class attributes. So if you want to do an ID, you put ID equals to, in quotations, the value. And then if you want to do a class, you say class equals to, in quotations, the value. So essentially what this will do, right, is that in your CSS file, if you put a hashtag and the ID value, right, all that specific element with that ID will now be sized up to whatever, like in this case, those will be sized up to 200% font size, because that is what we put inside of this rule, right? But for example, if you put color red, all of this ID, well, in fact, we'll cover this, right? But like ID can only be assigned to one element, which is where we use classes. Let's say we want to style multiple different elements, but not all the same tag. Then the main difference between the two is that one ID value cannot be put in multiple elements, but one class can be, right? And then if you have a dot set, you have to put a dot before. If you put a dot before, and then you put the class value, it will now style all of those with this text align center, right? Or if you put a color red here, it'll make them all red, so on and so forth. But now the last one that we'll want to cover is the universal selector. So the universal selector, if you put a hashtag as your selector and in curly braces, whatever is inside that curly braces will be applied to the entire website. So in this case, you see a bunch of random elements, right? Random heading, random paragraph, random randomness, right? As soon as we apply this universal tag, look at this website. Everything is now colored blue. So these are the 4 types of selectors. So now let's move on and talk about text and background color. So this is where we will talk about the shorthand hex, right? So you see the hashtag and then 3 values. The first digit will be the amount of red you want to have. The second digit will be the amount of green you want to have, and the last digit will be the amount of blue you want to have. So this goes from 0 to F, right? And 0 to 9 is like 0 to 9. It's the same digit we know. A through F is 10 through 15. So A is 10, B is 11, C is 12, so on and so forth. So for example, if you had F, 0, 0, right? That would be 15 red, 0 green, 0 blue. And you can use hex or regular colors, but we will be using either shorthand hex or just a color name. And of course, it doesn't matter what type of rule selector type you use. So, So in this case, you can see that like we already previewed the color, right? But if you just put color on its own as that property value, that just changes the text. So as you can see here, we have the double Fs, the nods, the Es, right? So you can see Fs meaning there's going to be a lot of red. So you can see this, my name is mostly red, right? But the one that we haven't covered is background color. And this actually changes the background of the element. So as you can see here, we are applying a tomato background to this element. So this is text and background color. Now, let's move on to the box model stuff. So we'll start off with borders and margins and then move on to padding. So the way that borders work is, in this case, we're adding a new type of element called a div. So essentially, this is a division of code that you want, like, as you can see here, this is like a division of text that we've surrounded in this div element. This will be very helpful once we get to using the box model. And in fact, I'll show you an example of this when we get to real-time coding. So now the borders, right? The way that it works is you're going to have a border, right? You just say border is the property. But the way the value works, the first thing is like in pixels will be the thickness of the border. And then you'll have either solid or dotted, right? So solid will be a solid border, dotted is a dotted border. And then the last one is the color of the border. This one isn't actually necessary, but if you want to make it something other than black, then let's say you want to put blue, it will make that border blue. Next is margins. And margins are specific to the page. For example, if you think of like a Word document, right, it works the exact same. Essentially, from the right side of the page, from all sides of the page, right, you can say how much space you want between the top, right, bottom, or left edges of your screen and actual elements. So the way this works is you can either use these individual margins, right? You can say margin top, this, or you could use shorthand margin, right? And for the shorthand margin, you just say margin, but the value, it goes top, right, bottom, left. So top 25 pixels, as you can see, it's small. 50 pixels from the right, so you see it's like a little bigger. 75, there's like, you can see there's some stuff in the bottom. And then 100 pixels for the left, you can see it's like that. So remember, top, right, bottom, left. And then, or you could just use like margin top, margin right, and then specify how much you want. Now, padding works very similar, but it's like, think of it as a margin inside of the actual div element. If you look at the last slide, if you look at the last slide, the border is right hugging the text, and this doesn't look good on a website. So the way that we'll do it is that we'll actually like put a margin between the sides of the border and the actual text. So this creates space around defined borders, and it works the same as margins, right? So padding top, right, bottom, left, or you could just do padding and have top, right, bottom, left. Same way, except this time it's inside of an element. You can see 25 pixels from the top, 50 pixels from the right, 75 pixels from the bottom, and 100 pixels from the left. So now, let's get into box model, right? And this is how we use to format and make our website look good, right? We have the margin on the outside, and this is inside of a div, right? We have a border, padding, and the content. So now, let's actually hop into the editor, and I'll show you how we can actually apply this to our About Me page. All right, so let's hop into the editor and actually take a look at how we can get one of these About Me pages actually made. So the link you'll want to go to is glitch.com/edit/exclamation mark, remix base starter. Copy that link, paste it, and now this is going to create a remix of our base starter pack in Glitch. This is why Glitch is really useful for HTML projects. You have all sorts of different packs and things that you could use. So the way this will work, right, is what this pack offers us is index.html, client.js, style.css, as well as a package.json and server.js, right? So when we get into Node, this type of base starter is how we actually apply. But now, let's get right into making our About Me page. And the cool thing with Glitch is that if you hit open in preview pane, it will actually show your website updated in real time on this side. So let's actually do it. So let's start by making a heading, right? We'll say art of job, right? This is me. And then let's start making different divs for our things. So for the div, right? And then let's make a comment. So we'll make a comment and then say, this will be our information div. Or actually, we'll say this is PII div. Or so personal information div. And then in here, we're going to now make an unordered list, right? UL is how we do that. And li is each element. So we can now say 10th grade. Yeah, 10th grade. And then the way we make another thing in this unordered list is we say Lee and then Redmond, Washington, and then we could say goes to Redmond High School. So this can be our information. And as you can see in the side, it is updated in real time. So now let's make another division, right? This division will be our interest division. So we can say interest div, right? And then let's actually create space between this just so our code is more readable, like so, right? With our interest div, we'll now say, okay, I like competitive math and programming. I like swimming, and I like, let's just say playing, didn't need to do that. So let's just say I like playing Minecraft, why not? So this will now, at the moment, it is not showing up as two different like things, right? So what we can do is we can create a paragraph for this, and we'll say interests. And then just to keep this readable, we'll keep this all in one line, like so. Actually, you know what? It's fine. So then we'll keep a paragraph here, and we'll say that this will be interest, so this is personal info, right? And then let's actually give these divisions their own ID. So ID, this will be PII, and then class info, right? Same thing with this one. We'll give ID interests, and then have a class of info, right? And then now let's make another division. And this time, let's actually try applying some of the stuff that we had from earlier, right? So let's first start by applying some of the quotations and citations that we talked about earlier, right? So the first one is block quote, right? So for block quote, the way that it works is it'll indent details to the side. So we'll say, oh, I didn't mean to do that. We'll say like YouTube channel. And this will actually be, we'll call this our quotes div. Quotes div, right? And we will say ID quotes. And then we won't actually make this an info class, right? We'll just keep this as an ID for quotes. Well, we want to style those two a specific thing. So we'll say YouTube channel, and then let's actually not have a list. So we'll say YouTube channel, and then we'll make a block quote, right? So block quote, and then we will cite my YouTube channel. Cite, let's just put in my YouTube link here. We'll say Arnavja 2027. There we go. So now we'll say, okay, now we can do an abbreviation here. So we can say Arnav makes academic videos and is part of a non-profit organization called LUMA, right? And then in this LUMA, we can now put a title for this abbreviation, right? So we can say learning, learning, understanding, mastering, applying, coding, right? So now we can see here, Arnav makes academic videos and is part of a nonprofit organization called LUMA. So if we highlight it over it, it'll show us all that. So in this case, right, we can also put sites. So we can say information comes from, and then inside we can cite YouTube. So this will be like our site details. And in fact, let's actually no, it's fine. Yeah, you can see this YouTube is now organized like so. And then now what we can say is that, let's put an address, right? So inside of this address, we'll have things. So we'll say like copyright, no. We'll say designed by Arnavja using HTML and CSS. Okay, yeah, using HTML and CSS 2027, right? So that's pretty, I think we used all, oh no, we didn't use a quote yet. So inside of this, let's just say, we say Dr. Seuss said, and then inside this we can put a quote, right? So inside this, art is the best way of expressing yourself, right? So here we have used all of our the things we all of the things that we could use in HTML that we've learned so far, right? This is mainly everything, right? But as you can see here, this website looks pretty bland, right? Okay, sure, we got the basic info down, we got all of that, right? But in order to make this actually look better, we will use our style.css file. And you see right here, line 5, I've got the link rel equals style sheet, href, and then style.css. So this is the important part that you want in order to link your style.css. In the next lesson, we'll cover that this code actually imports our JavaScript code, but that is for next lesson. So let's get into our style.css. So now for this, right, what we are going to do is we are going to first use like colors. So we can say, let's make a rule, right? All of the heading, the first headings, right, will have a blue color and will be aligned to the center. In fact, not blue. Why don't we just use light blue? There we go. That looks good, right? Actually, I think blue looks better, let's be honest. But we could actually use hex code. So we say 00F, right? That is blue. But you can make this a little brighter. We can put like 5.5, right? And we can add like a little green. We can make it like 9. There you go. That is like a good shade of blue. 5.9F, that color. So that is our first rule. And then now let's color the paragraphs. Let's not center them, but let's just make them have a color of like red. So we'll say like, yeah, something like that. Oh no, that's not red. Yeah, like that color works. So now like that, and then we'll say that this actually we'll give it a font size of 180%, right? Look at how we're putting semicolons after each one, right? And then this one will give a font size of 140%. Wait, why is my heading's not like... Oh, no, because 180 I think is a default for... But you see now our things are sized up. In fact, let's size this up more. Let's make it like 210. There we go. That's good. And then around the headings, let's actually keep a border. Let's actually use our borders here. We can use 1 pixel. Actually, you know what? Actually, headings are not the best place to put borders. Let's get into our div, right? So now we can make divisions, right? And our divisions, right, are personal info, interests, YouTube channel, right? Each one, let's make them have, let's put a border. Let's put a border, and then let's make it 2 pixels of solid and make it black. Yeah. As you see, there are now surrounded borders, but you know, it doesn't look the greatest. But for now, let's actually make the width. We could actually use the width, right? So we can make it 100 pixels. Oh, no, that's way too small. Okay. Yeah, that's actually good. It's like boxes, right? Actually, you know what? 300 pixels. There we go. Yeah, that's perfect, I think. And then now let's add padding, right? So we'll say 25 pixels on each side. 25 pixel, 25 pixel, 25 pixel. Yeah. And let's actually decrease this width. Let's make it 200 pixels. I like that. Yeah, there we go. That looks a whole lot better. And as you can see here, we have less thing here, so we can actually lower the top and bottoms. So let's actually make this like 15 on the top and 15 on the bottom. There we go. That looks much better. In fact, let's make the top like 10. There we go. Oh. 5. Yeah, that looks good. As you can see, we now have boxes, and let's actually... Should we align the text? We can make these centered. Align center. And you know what? Actually, okay, no, that doesn't work. Okay, you know what? We'll keep it as is, like that. And then now we'll toss in a background color, right? We'll say background color is light blue, right? You know what? There it is. You know, we'll just keep that as our default div, right? But now we want to color, let's use our class. So info boxes, right? We want to class them with a, let's make the normal color background color. Let's make it like really light blue. So we'll say like DDF. That will be like light blue like that. But for the info boxes, we want them to have a background color of, let's say, EFF. Why not? So you see the info boxes now. This is like, these two are light blue, but this one is like a little darker blue. So this is a good use of our info. But now, if we preview this in a new window, right, we can see they're all hugged to the side, right? So at least for this one, right, let's actually not make the width. Let's increase the width to 400 pixels for this. But the info boxes will have a width of 200 pixels, like so. So this one's going to be a little wider. There we go. And then I think the last thing we could do is we could just now there we go. Yeah. And as you can see, they're now nicely separated, right? Our name is at the top and our things are on the side. Of course, like we could make this probably a little better, but this is a great start for what we have right now. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure to leave a like, subscribe,